Well, good morning slash afternoon, everybody. We're excited for you to be joining us today for our eighth Growth Hour webinar from the Shed Advisor about frictionless teams. My name is Rebecca Bradley Ray, and I will serve as your moderator for today. If you have any comments or questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to enter them in the chat box. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, so for those on the phone, you may just unmute and ask us directly. Now, let me introduce our host for today. Steve Byler is a certified speaker and coach with Maxwell Leadership and a certified EOS implementer who assists leaders and leadership teams in getting clear with their vision in order to get more out of what they really want from their businesses. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Rebecca, and delighted to be with you all again today. And I admit, I left my camera blind so you guys don't see this and get jealous, but I'm actually sitting out at my camp here in Highland County on the front porch with the breezes blowing, and I'm extra happy because of that. So I don't know how that's going to impact the webinar, but hopefully the happiness will spill over to you and you get some of the benefits, of the vitamin D streaming in from the sunshine here. So we are the Shed Advisor, and SHED is simply an acronym for Smart, Healthy Executives Deliver. And I want to note that we really do pay attention to both smart and healthy. Smart in that you've got to be good at your job. You have to have the skills and the abilities to do your job well, whatever the function you play in your company. But you also have to be healthy, because the health of leadership deeply impacts the health of the organizations that we lead. And so we need to be healthy in order to be effective, and smart, healthy executives do deliver on their promises to their clients, deliver on the value that they offer, and also deliver on healthy cultures for the employees that are in their companies. I'm delighted today to have Matthias Miller with us as a guest. Matthias is the co-founder of Codehouse. And Codehouse is a company that helps business owners find and eliminate constraints within their businesses using healthy systems. So he helps his clients improve their processes, then automate them through either existing tools, AI, or fully custom software solutions. He's helped build these tools for clients ranging from startups and mid-sized enterprises, as well as top banks and insurance companies in the United States. He's co-architected full end-to-end ERP systems, helped run highly successful software projects, and has consulted with nine-figure businesses on their ERPs. His experience allows his clients to experience the ongoing benefits of profitable, predictable business growth. And if you note, one of my lines in what I do is help people get more of what they want from their businesses. And usually on that list are things like profit and predictable growth. So these clearly line up, Matthias, today. And so delighted to have you here. And particularly what we're going to focus on is the book that he has just released called Frictionless Teams, Unlocking Momentum by Solving Invisible Conflicts. Now, I'm going to poke at Matthias a bit around this whole theory of frictionless teams. Okay, I've been on teams, lots of different teams. And when I saw his title, I said, frictionless teams? So let me just note, the book is available as an ebook now. The hard copies are at the press, will be released before too long. And because you're on the webinar today, you have the opportunity just to submit your email address in the chat box. Rebecca will pick that up. And we're going to give away up to 10 copies of this book in the hard copy, not just the PDF version, but the actual hard copy when it comes out. So Matthias will reach out, get your mailing address, and get those mailed out. So if you want to be one of the first to get a hard copy of this book, Frictionless Teams, and decide for yourself whether it's just, some idealistic hoo-ha or whether he actually is onto something, we'll have him defend his title here in a few moments. So just another little line of introduction. I was chatting with a friend last night, and he said, so what's your webinar on today or tomorrow? And I said, well, it's a book called Frictionless Teams by a guy named Matthias Miller. And we'll be talking about frictionless teams. And he got this quizzical look on his face and said, is the guy married? So Matthias, just to kind of launch straight in kind of an antagonistic almost sort of way, frictionless teams, are you married? And is your marriage a frictionless team?
I can't think of a better way to start this webinar, Steve. When you raised that question, first of all, I am married. And yes, my wife and I do experience friction in our marriage, and yes, it's a good thing. Um, your question took me back to a story that my parents used to love to tell. And there was this old couple who were chatting one day, and they were chatting about their breakfast food. And the husband looks up to his wife endearingly and says, "Hey, you know these pancakes you've been making me for the last 50 years? They're actually not my favorite." And she looks at him all shocked, and she's like, "But I thought pancakes were your favorite food. I hate making pancakes, and I've spent the last 50 years making pancakes for you." So to your point, sometimes we got to surface tension before we can actually resolve the tension. And sometimes the worst tension is the hidden tension, the tension that you don't see. Just like in the case of here, why am I making these pancakes? There's an inner tension, and if we could only surface the inner tension, we could actually resolve. Uh, we could actually resolve the solve the underlying tension. And I think along with that, I think cars are another good example. If you're a young teenager and you're punching on the gas pedal and you're on this gravel road, which is where I grew up with all kinds of gravel roads, and it's shooting gravel out the back, and there's a lot of noise and activity, but there's not enough friction to actually get you to move forward. So once you actually get friction, you get progress. Now, also with a car, sometimes, quite frankly, friction's a terrible thing. And if you don't put oil in your car, you will introduce friction, and it's not going to be a good thing. So really, a lot of this comes down to discerning what is good tension, what's necessary tension, and what's tension that's just getting in the way of forward progress.
Okay, that's excellent because I'm sure you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions, and he says that one of the problems or one of the challenges of an unhealthy teams that are dysfunctional, is the avoidance or absence of conflict. So conflict, though, is not an and. I think maybe that's the issue that you're addressing. We can't live in perpetual conflict. We have to resolve the conflict at some level. Does that have us starting to move in the right direction here, Matthias?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times we tolerate conflict because we don't know what to do about it or what the underlying issue is. Sometimes we think it's personal when it really isn't personal. There's some kind of problem, and unless you can actually appropriately diagnose why folks are in conflict, you can't really resolve it.
Yeah, and so that's where you kind of had me, Matthias, with the subtitle to your book. Okay, so I'm coming out fighting with the frictionless teams, but one of my favorite words, business words, team words, institutional words, is momentum. Because momentum is just one of the secret sauces of successful companies. Hard to get momentum going, but once you've got that momentum going, it's also hard to stop it. It's easy to drive it's hard to steer a parked car, but with some momentum, you can steer it. So unlocking momentum really is an important part of reducing friction. So let's talk a little bit about maybe what in your personal, everybody has a story, and it's very rare that a first book especially doesn't have a personal story behind it. What in your personal experience, personal life, personal challenges kind of maybe was most impactful in forming your insights here?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that was most impactful. This book is not a book that we actually put it together in a relatively short amount of time, but I've been writing it for probably 2 decades. I don't know. Part of the impetus for the book was finding myself right out of high school in a job where everybody was clapping for me and they were saying, "Oh, you're doing such a wonderful job, and we're so impressed." And internally, I was just like, "This is the worst thing in the world. It's paying well. I should love it. I'm getting applauded, but I hate it." And it sent me down this very, very long rabbit hole. It turns out that apparently I have a way of thinking and looking at the world that's very different than what most people do. So much of my life has been a matter of looking at looking at where I fit in the world. After trying one employment after the other, I was kind of forced into entrepreneurship, and then from there it was one thing after the next, trying to make sense of the world, realizing that I look at the world very differently. And so this book was really about me making sense of the world at the most fundamental level. What is it that makes business successful? What is it that makes organizations successful? And what makes individuals successful as well? And this was the best language that I could use to capture that.
One thing I do like about friction, so you didn't use the term burnout. You do use it in your book. I personally, as many people that I know about me, went through a pretty serious burnout, uh, almost 8 years ago now. And I've often wondered, where does that word come from? Well, it's actually friction that's non-productive. So it's burning lots of energy. And so when you have a great car with a big engine, sports car, you go out and you do a burnout on the road, you burn a huge amount of fuel, use a lot of horsepower to burn the rubber on the road, but you're not really going anywhere. So a great burnout is lots of energy expended with very little progress. And is that the kind of thing you're talking about? So
Yeah.
the amount of energy being expended
Yeah.
versus
Yes.
the outcomes.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And I think this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but this really kind of tips my hand towards the process that I use, because in every, whether it's individually or within a company, there's always one or two things that are inordinately draining energy, or there's one or two things that inordinately, if we just double down on these one or two things, like we could really have some productive output. The burnout story actually does hit a bit personally. This was even prior to me being in business. I had a burnout in my career, where the first year that I was married, I was locked up in a little solo office, hunched over a keyboard, trying to push through one thing after the next. And I had reached a point that was actually so low that for the first year that we were married, on my wife's birthday, I was so depleted that I didn't actually have the energy to celebrate her birthday with her. And I look at that as probably one of the lowest points of burnout that I've experienced. And I
Yeah.
didn't have an explanation for it, and not an understanding for what contributed to it. So that can certainly happen on a personal level. It can also happen on an organizational level as well.
So let's back up and just talk about friction. And maybe before we ask the question, isn't friction normal? Can we say friction and conflict, we're talking about basically the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think conflict we typically think of, I take a fairly broad view of friction. Conflict we typically think of as human to human conflict, which is part of what can slow an organization down if it's not productive. But there's also we also experience conflict with things.
Yeah.
And I see this with sales teams all the time in particular, but there's something that they have to do, as part of their quoting process, as part of whatever, that's just really, I mean, it's friction ridden. It's a lot of effort for not a lot of value that it ends up providing to the salesperson or customer or company. So with that caveat, absolutely.
Yeah. And so this friction or this conflict, and I think you use maybe three different kind of spatial terms: external, internal, and personal. And let's just hold on that just a second. I'm jumping ahead too, I think. So you're saying conflict or friction is a pretty normal thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's go ahead.
Well, I love how much we're coming back to physics. You couldn't
Yeah,
walk out the back. You couldn't walk across the porch back into your cabin if you didn't have friction. But if you
right.
get to the door and there's too much friction, you're going to be locked out. It's going
Yeah.
to be a sorry time that you have. Yes. And this is, again, the same is true in business.
So it's normal. Now, when does friction and we're going to assume with Patrick Lencioni that there's an aspect of conflict that's healthy.
Right.
And you particularly use the term invisible conflicts.
Right.
So they're conflicts that have not been identified. And those are probably actually the ones that cause us the biggest problems, right? Because we can't resolve them until we've, in EOS, we often use the term smoking out the issues. And we often have to smoke them out of the hive, smoke them out of the, the hole in the tree, because they're not visible. We think they're in there, but we first of all somehow have to identify those conflicts.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I don't know what your experience has been. I think for a lot of owners, when you're in constant reactivity mode and you've got things coming at you, it's very easy to kind of play whack-a-mole and just do one-off solutions instead of blocking out the time to sit down and tease apart what the actual issue really is. And if you just sit down and probe and just go a little deeper, it's surprising what can surface. I can think of one example of conflict between the sales team and production, and basically production wasn't delivering on their lead times, and the sales team was frustrated. And this was the third time that it happened. And each time there's kind of this back to the wall, let's just fix the problem, which solved the problem in each situation and case. But the real invitation was to sit down and dig deeper. Like, why are we selling buildings with wrong lead times? Why are we not hitting our lead times? And when we actually dug deeper into the actual issue, it became fairly obvious that there were some process gaps, that just putting a few simple processes in place completely eliminated that and really gave the sales team a whole other level of belief in selling the product. And also just production gets to win because they're not behind the eight ball.
Right. And that kind of the gaps in process always result in friction of some sort.
Yeah.
And I, in the little time I've known you, Matthias, I think your first kind of go-to is process to resolve some of these things. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. And I think it's an appropriate place. There are other places where these frictions lie, these conflicts lie. But process, particularly in companies that have some level of complexity, from the sales through the financial, what I say is from the promise of sales to the honest assessment of Google in the reviews on your, Google listing. That kind of is this final snapshot you get of how you actually did based on the promise that the salespeople made up front.
Right.
So, and process ties that all together into a consistent deliverable. So how does process help us in the kind of external dimension to this war? And by the way, I want to poke around a little bit. You use the term war a lot, and war as the result of the frictions that exist. And so I'm curious, do you think our background, maybe the culture that we come from, where one of the quote prominent characteristics is our commitment to nonviolence? And again, I a bit tongue in cheek, I told this to a friend last night. We're deeply committed to nonviolence in the political spectrum, just not in the families and homes and churches, right? So we're very violent when it comes to the private parts of our lives and internal in our churches and things. But politically, we're nonviolent. So does that at all factor into our being slightly allergic to conflict, friction?
I can't imagine it not affecting it. and it may also be that suppression of the concepts of war in one area makes it surface in greater ways in other places. To the point of external, like one of the points that I made in the book, one of the I guess kind of three pillars or three spatial areas that you were talking about is how we find ourselves in the market. And
yeah,
And you actually had a question prior to the war question about that. I think it's important to note that we understand natural disasters. We understand forces that are greater than ourselves. And there's a lot of success in business that really comes down to what is the market as a whole doing. And when we learn to surrender, there's things we can fight and change, and there's things that we can't. And when we surrender ourselves to natural forces and learn to work with them instead of trying to overpower them, it kind of keeps us from drinking our own Kool-Aid and making bad decisions because of our own pride, I suppose.
So, and I'd like to, we did not talk about this, Matthias, so this is uncharted waters. And you can, deal with me afterwards if you want to. But both of us, but for different reasons, showed up in the shed industry.
Right.
Okay. And some of the people that are on our webinar today come from the shed industry. A significant percentage that watch it are from the shed industry. What are you seeing? How are you seeing shed companies today, particularly battling against these external kind of market forces?
Right.
Anything come to mind? Things that you observe?
Well, this is my observation from where I sit. I think I don't know that I've got a completely full picture, but in my opinion, grand scale, we're seeing the maturing of an industry. And so it used to be that you could run it without software tools. Well, that's pretty much becoming ubiquitous. I mean, you need to have some kind of software tools to run your business. And you used to be able to just put up, you know, open up a lot at the right location. And now you need marketing to drive traffic. And the evolution of growth that I'm seeing is that it used to be that you could basically just let people show up and let them buy, and now there's much more proactive engagement needed in order to sell. And just from where I sit, again, limited perspective, but from where I sit, the companies that are doing the best are the ones who are embracing the maturing process that the industry's in and saying, all right, so if we need to invest in sales. We want to do sales in a way that's ethical, that's aligned, that's all of the things, but we can't just be sitting back waiting for people to come in. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's getting to the heart of your question or not.
Well, I think it's clearly one of the key issues we're facing in the industry. And so, and just to illustrate, I sold my first shed when I was 6 years old. Okay, you tell that to a successful sales rep in the shed industry today. I didn't follow a sale. Well, I did follow a sales process, barely. What I did was really take an order.
Right.
Okay, and I think because of the market demand, probably for 40 years, you could kind of just take orders. If there was a shed sitting there and all you needed was an order taker to write down what the customer wanted. And probably what spoiled us a little bit is that was going away since, 2004, 2005. There was enough presence in the market that to be successful, you really needed to have a good sales process, a good marketing message, a consistent experience when they showed up at your lot with the marketing message you had communicated leading up to that space. Now, the exception was, which kept the dream alive, was that there were sections in the East the market was close to saturated, but there were still sections in the Midwest and out into the West and Northwest where it was not saturated. And so the stories were being perpetuated. We opened a lot and sold $300,000 in, the first month. The demand was there. They weren't great salespeople. They took orders, and there was a lot of people who wanted the thing. Okay, and so we were starting to face that market maturation, the presence of dealerships kind of across the country or corporate lots. And you had to have, I would say in our company, we started in 72. We hired our first professional salesperson in 2008. And that was about 4 years too late. However, COVID let us live with the illusion again for a while, because all of a sudden everybody wanted a shed in their backyard because they couldn't go anywhere, right? So they wanted to do something in the backyard and they wanted a shed. And so we had this massive tailwind again, for about 2 or 3 years. And now people are crying the blues because I can't sell sheds. And honestly, I'm seeing companies who are strictly dealer-based model. They have no influence over the process the dealer is using. Seeing, revenue declines of dealer lots by 30, 50, 60, some of them 70 to 80%. Somebody's still selling the shed. We don't think that the number of units has declined that much. But the market is pivoting, and it's maturation of an industry. It's a bit of a saturation of the industry, especially in some market areas. And we're how. So let's go to this war word, and then you use the term quite a bit. Competition. Is competition a good thing? Is it good for the customer? Is it not good for the customer? How do we respond to a increasingly competitive marketplace around our industry?
Yeah, well, competition can be good. I suspect that competition is rarely really the best thing for business. It can help you sharpen and become better. But to your example, it's way easier to make money in a competition or in an industry or in a sector where demand far outpaces supply. And like you
Right.
said, like you didn't think about sales skills back when you were 6 years old. You just did. Do you want to buy it? Like, great, sign here.
Yeah.
Like,
What color do you want?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, and to your point, I think there's a few different ways that you can address this. You can one of the things I do with companies that I work with is I often take a look at what they're doing and look at where there are pockets of untapped where there's high demand, low supply, because those can be easy wins. Is competition good for the customer? Well, it depends. I think we have tended to believe that competition is really good for the customer. It drives prices down. It forces people to step up their game. It does all of those things. There are downsides to competition as well. I think of I spent a few years, or I spent almost a year living in Bangladesh, and I would go down to the country bazaar, and if you're a white American walking the streets, they assume immediately that you've got money, and it's not completely unreasonable because it takes money to get there, especially comparatively by living standards. And then you would be accosted by about 6 different people trying to sell you their wares, and they're all in the same proximity. And so consumers don't like buying from high pressure salespeople, but in some sense, part of the desperation comes from the high level of competition where everybody's trying to, keep food on the table or hit their new goal at whatever level they're at. They're all fighting over the same piece of the pie. Um, and unless you actually introduce some kind of innovation, like, I mean, people say people talk about an abundance mindset, but unless there is some level of innovation, there isn't an abundance mindset to be had.
Right.
So it is an invitation then, and I enjoy seeing some of these things within the shed industry. It's an invitation for folks to innovate.
And in that innovation, I know specifically you mentioned positioning yourself with market forces rather than against them.
Correct.
And so when you're positioned with market forces, that reduces friction.
Yeah.
And facilitates momentum.
Correct.
So I'm curious, do you have any examples of, it can be in the shed industry or not, of somebody who made a bit of a pivot in their strategy that really allowed them to move with market forces rather than just working against the market?
Well, I think this is probably one of my favorite ones from my early consulting days. I had an owner reach out, and they wanted help with their financials because they were barely able to keep their budget right set up. And I took their money, and I was, as a young consultant, really nervous about taking their money and making sure I give them the value. And I looked over their financials. I couldn't see any way to squeeze more blood out of it. And so we got on a call, we
Yeah.
started talking. He's like, well, we have this thing over here that we're doing, but we also have these adjacent lines of business. I have like 3 or 4 businesses that are all running. And so my simple observation and comment to him was like, listen, this business can feed this business. You guys can share leads back and forth. You can service each other. I mean, in this case, there was some property management involved, and because you're working with properties, there was landscaping and cleaning and other types of things that all integrated. And so no business was able to be wildly successful off of itself by its own right, but he integrated these, and by integrating them was able to expand, align, and maybe this isn't the best example, but he was able to align himself with market forces to basically raise the tide across all the businesses.
Yeah. And so really there's some synergy that took place
Yep.
between things that you could actually control, and you could unlock some value in that interplay rather than only having to unlock value by going to war against competition in the marketplace and really against market forces.
That's correct. And it looks deceptively, these types of business models look deceptively simple on the outside. Oh, they have a cleaning company. I'm competing with the cleaning company. No, you're not. You're competing against 3 companies. And so
Right.
that's the best type of competitive advantage, where there's something that looks unobtrusive on the surface, but then under the surface, it's like, if you really dig, there's an interconnected root system that's really difficult to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm going to be a little cautious here, taking this into the shed industry, but my head is exploding with illustrations of this in the shed industry, because there are companies who are pivoting their strategies for that very reason.
Mhm.
And both of us do consulting, coaching work, and so we prefer to be paid for the big giveaways, right?
Yep.
However, there are companies who are saying, and this really is one of the questions you have to ask, is in the circle of control, what can I control, what can I influence, and then what's outside of my control, kind of those 3 concentric circles. And the marketplace itself is really outside of my control. So when we get anxious and tied up in knots about what's happening in the marketplace, rather than focusing on, so what can I actually influence and what can I control, and making our strategic shifts right there, that's how we unlock the greatest value. But we're paying attention to what's outside of our control and see where it's going, see if we can pick up on a wave. It's a bit of the blue ocean strategy, correct? We're looking, we
Right.
don't want to be in a red ocean that's filled with shark blood. And if we could find a blue ocean to swim in, that's a lot less friction and war,
Yes.
much healthier place, and a lot, let's just be honest, a lot less stress.
Yes.
And
One
so,
time, I'm sorry to jump in. So tying back to
well,
your
we're
earlier
both.
question,
I'm gonna dive in all the time, so you're free to as well. I'll just give you permission.
our aversion to conflict, to war, like maybe there's an element of that that's a good thing. Like if you actually pay attention to this, we don't think of ourselves as being prone to violence within an industry, but a higher level of thinking might be, what if I wouldn't be prone to violence? What would it take to succeed in the space that I'm in? And it might introduce this question, like you're saying, is there a place, am I trying to swim in blood infested waters? And is there a nicer, cleaner, fresher pool that I could be swimming in? And it doesn't mean, it might mean leaving the industry. That's a big leap, but it doesn't have to mean that.
No,
There's
no, not at all.
lanes to swim in. So yeah.
Okay, so, and I just note you have a couple of things here in your book, kind of questions to ask around kind of this external space. Where am I positioned in the marketplace? Do I have momentum in the market? Where's the market momentum? What's my competitive stance? And in EOS, I find this incredibly helpful. What are my 3 uniques? Every shed company is going to have 2 of the 3 that I have, but I can position myself in a way that the 3 uniques that I bring to my customers, a certain group of people will value and give me money for that collection. Those 3 things combined, as opposed to the 3 the neighbor owns, the lot just down the street. he has another 3 that he's bringing to the marketplace, and other people will value that. It's great, but we're not going head to head. We're speaking a bit 2 different languages. We're approaching things a bit differently, and in a sense, creating market ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that could be said. I think we talked about physics earlier. Gravity is a great force. And the closer you can get to your ideal customer, the more gravity you can create with that. And the more you can distance yourself from your competitor, the more you reduce gravity, their gravitational pull.
Yeah.
And to your point, as a market becomes more increases in saturation, that's when there's submarkets that split off, which is exactly
Correct.
what you're talking about. Like, what is this little piece of the market that I can carve off? I think what you described right there of what is the 3 unique things is that's a painful process
It
to
is.
come up with. But it's also it is worth its weight in gold to spend that time. And it can't just be what is unique, because anything can come up with something that's unique, but what is unique from them that also has affinity with the people who want to buy from me.
That's correct. You've got to be sure that the marketplace values those things, and there's enough people in the marketplace who value those things that you can achieve your goals and objectives inside your business.
Correct.
Yeah. And so to all of our guests here today, Matthias then lists a couple of possible action plans here, really to deal with your external alignment. So I'm just going to commend the book to you for those list of 5 things. I'm even going to give them a clue on what they are, Matthias. So we'll see if we can get a few more people just to go ahead and make the commitment to get this book. Let's talk about, and this is probably where I spend more of my time working with teams, is this internal alignment, because there are so many teams, so many companies that are absorbing an enormous or consuming an enormous amount of energy by the internal conflicts. And how can we start getting internal alignment so that we reduce just the heat created internally, burning all this energy, and be aligned and effective as an organization? And we're talking business here today, but man, I see it in nonprofits and churches and families, and wherever we don't have internal alignment, we're burning a lot of energy just fighting our internal battles. So how do we end, as you call it, the organizational war?
Yeah, well, let me start by sharing. I'm just gonna if I can maybe share my screen, just share a slide here. I think it gives a good
So
visual.
let me.
Looks like I got it now.
Okay.
So in terms of alignment, here's how I think about it. You have the places where there's nothing aligned, which is just chaotic.
Yep.
But then there's 2 other types of alignment that you want to build. One's vertical alignment, which is like in your work, like what is the vision? What's the compelling vision? And then you want to create alignment so that as you go down the org chart, that people are moving towards that, and we're actually all rowing in the same direction. But then there's also the question of horizontal alignment, which is the department versus department. And I mentioned a few of these types of issues, but the friction department against department. Like, for me to win in production, I got to have this, but if I do this, then I'm going to undercut sales. And so for sales to win, it's got to have that. Like, so we're each individual department is sometimes optimized for, they're trying to hit different goals.
Right.
And so how do you get them aligned? And we can talk a little bit about the answer, but that is fundamentally the thing we're solving for.
Yeah, and I use a similar sort of kind of visual, but when you have leadership teams that are not aligned, that's my primary job. Get the leadership team in the room and smoke out the issues, have the debates. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's be sure that we can all get aligned. Then when that leadership team goes back to their company, that's their job now, is to get the rest of the organization aligned, because they're not. Everybody has a different vision of what success looks like. Everybody has a different sense of what the priorities are. And so getting internal alignment, I mean, it's just absolutely essential. You cannot win the marketplace in the external battle if you're not aligned internally. And, Jack Welch and many others have said it. culture wins over strategy any day. You can have three companies all with the basic same strategy working in the same marketplace. And it's the one that gets this internal alignment that has the dynamic, synergistic, collaborative culture around a shared vision. They're going to win, just hands down. They're going to win every time.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of owners experience when it's absent is, and I hear this a lot. I don't know what your experience has been, but it's like everybody's complaining. Everybody has something to complain about. Like sales is always complaining about the bad leads, and marketing is always complaining about these lazy salespeople who can't close, and production's complaining about sales. And why are they trying to sell this complicated building? And sales is complaining about production, and then in the shed industry, we're complaining about the haulers, and the haulers are complaining about somebody else. And it's very easy to turn this into try to make this personal. And
Yeah.
it's not, in my opinion. Well, sometimes it is, and that has
Sometimes, yeah, I was
sometimes
going to
it
say,
really is.
sometimes it is.
But there are some times when people are complaining because I'm in this little window here, and all I see is the problem. And I've never run the entire organization. I can't step back and see, oh, like if we would fix this process over here, haulers would be happy, production would be happy, sale. Like we're all going to have tension. There's still going to be limits and lines and things like that. But there's ways that we can turn the dials and tune this so that we're actually all these complaints. I guess here's my point I'm trying to make. These complaints are surfacing issues. And if we're willing to dig a little bit deeper below the surface, many times there's ways that we can solve this with process, with systems, with just better ways of doing things.
Yeah. And so I love the language you're using. Again, the language we use is we love issues. Issues is simply the list of things that stands between where we are and the vision that we have for the future. And if you can't get the issues listed, you can't solve the issues.
Yep.
So once you identify the issues, you've got to have a place for them to live until you decide they are the priority to solve. And then to solve an issue, you've got to really figure out what the root cause of the issue is. And sometimes it's a process issue, and processes solve it. A system solves it. Sometimes, and here's where I don't think it's primarily what your book is about, but sometimes it's a people issue. You just have the wrong person on the bus, and the person simply is not going to get aligned, and they just need to ride a different bus. And you need to free up their future. You need to have the courage to say, this isn't your bus. Over there's a bus I think that might fit you better. Can we help you transfer at the next stop?
Yeah. Well, Steve,
But we have to smoke them out.
There's no way we can get there. I actually do touch on some of that on the internal alignment, but I want to harp on this just a little bit because I'm probably about to leap out of my chair with this. I think the most powerful executive is the one that integrates left brain and right brain thought. And here's what I mean by that. I've been in lots of situations where I had a knot in my stomach and I'm like emotionally, like there's an emotional reaction here. There's something off. Well, and it's easy to pull the trigger on that and be like, all right, so let's go fix the problem. No, an emotional reaction is an invitation to dig into the numbers. Like, let's go find the facts of what's actually going on. And as you do that, you're like, oh, well, now it's obvious. Like, we actually have data that says that this person isn't performing. And I had this happen with a salesperson where I was consulting with a company, one of their salespeople weren't performing, and we dove into it and found out that this person was on a revenue roller coaster. Well, great. Now we have data for the red flag. We can actually have a conversation. We can create accountability around that. The other point is true. If you're a numbers person and you get to numbers, again, working with a client, putting together an in-depth, a pretty comprehensive company dashboard, and going through the training of that, it's like you're not going to just run numbers, business by the numbers. You need to understand the story behind that. So, dear salesperson, you are putting in this much less effort. Well, help me understand what's going on. And so a really great leader can integrate both sides of that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Again, one of the lines I love, and I forget where I picked this up, but we need to make a decision as a team, right? If we have data, let's use data. If we're going to go with a feeling, let's go with mine.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the challenge, right? That's the challenge, because people feel differently because they're standing at different places looking at it from different angles. And so the emotions they bring to the table are a bit different. One person can feel exhilarated and the other one absolutely terrified. And the terrified person is going to pull back and reduce risk. The other one is we're all in. And so we have to have data to help us navigate those two emotions. And, probably won't change the emotional stance, but it'll inform the emotional stance. And we can actually move forward together again, thereby reducing the friction that was primarily emotional by data.
Right.
And just, a great illustration of this, actually. A company that I'm an owner in, the owners were together for our monthly meeting, and we're talking about this CEO addressing a significant hire that needs to be made. And two internal candidates and a couple of new external candidates were trying to find the best person. And the CEO says he's tilted toward this internal candidate. And I said, I have yet to see that candidate deliver successful results from the 3 roles they've held in the company. He said, oh, wait a minute, pulled up a spreadsheet. And he had evaluated the tenure of this person in one of the specific roles that was at the pinnacle of the success of the company in that particular department. And he said he actually led 3 months prior to this and during those 3 peak. And he said, Steve, the industry, this was not the peak of the the tidal wave of shed sales, was it? And I said, no, you're right, it wasn't. So there again, this is how I felt. He said, well, here's the data. And you have to have both. You want the soul of the company, you want people's emotions to be factored in, but you also want the data to give us things to actually measure by. So company scorecards, dashboards, absolutely essential to resolving the emotional responses that show up with teams. And they help to reduce the friction, as you say, and get alignment.
Correct.
So we're down to about 10 minutes here. And I'd like for you just to talk a little bit about the internal aspect of this frictionless. Well, how do we start thinking about personal alignment? And I assume by personal alignment, resolving the inner war, you're talking about the war I have with myself, inside of myself, and where I can burn a lot of energy in those internal they're dialogues. They're not monologues. They're internal dialogues.
Right. So just real briefly, I'm gonna share this little image that I go through in the book. But in my mind, there's a pyramid that we all have in terms of peak performance, and I think at the very base level, there's things that we want to do. You want to. This is all personality stuff. You want to talk to people. You want to stay by yourself. You have an interest in photography and images and beauty. You have an interest in tangibles. You have an interest in ideas. Whatever the want to. And there's what you will do. How do you instinctively take action? What do you know how to do, which is your cognitive skills? And then at the very highest level, what are you inspired to do? And this starts tying into purpose and revelation and flow. And this is more of the spiritual dynamic of who we actually are. And I think the more of these that you can align in your day-to-day activities, and we're never aiming for 100%, but I think a lot of people underestimate how much alignment you actually can create across the spectrum. And to your point earlier around teams, there's if somebody's not performing, sometimes it just is a matter of misalignment on one of these levels. The other thing I think that plays a really important role is something that I call the trauma talent connection. And some of the most successful business people I know have experienced trauma in their childhood, and it's what drove them to go into business. They had something to prove their dad. They had something to prove to somewhere else, or they wanted to be enough, or they were always the underdog and they wanted to prove they're not. And as a result of that, or maybe they didn't have friends, so they learned how to read the room, and they became this exceptional salesperson because they can read anybody. And that skill set got developed out of a trauma response. And so because of that, they became extraordinarily good at that. And the problem is that And that can get you to a certain point. But the problem moving past that point is if you don't deal with the trauma and you don't find resolution to that part of it, then you start, well, you create friction within your company, within your team. It
Right.
leaks out on other people. I'm sure you've seen that. And I would be surprised if you didn't have some of your own version of this.
No, I do. I do. And we could do another whole webinar on this, how to begin to, and there's a sense we have to get us to a certain stage in life in order to have enough experience to revisit those traumatic things and find healing and move on from them. Because something has to be resolved in those spaces. And it's interesting. I see a lot of people, and this is part of my own story, that for a period of time, that passion you had that was driving you, suddenly it's gone and you have no more drive to keep going. And so you now have to realign with the purpose that's outside of yourself. There's an entire season of rediscovery of what the true purpose is before the passion comes back. For me, it was almost a 5-year period from passion that led to burnout and a recovery of a truer, I would say, vision fueled passion that aligned with personal values. Now, I still have internal conflicts and internal monologues and dialogues, because we're always on the path toward congruency and wholeness as opposed to fragmentation. Now, I happened to see something in your book that I didn't see first time through. And we're friends for life now, Matthias, unless you have permanently deleted Makoto Fujimura's wallpaper from your list. He's my favorite contemporary artist. Okay, and I don't know what picture you had. Mine was Broken Splendor. Absolutely magnificent. Heard him speak a couple times, have some autographed work of his. So I'm not buddies with the guy, okay, but I'm a fan. I'm a fanboy. Love his paintings. And the concept you note is that generosity leads to generative work. Generative work leads to generational impact. That's a form of an abundance mindset that is a creative, exponentially enlarging perspective. And for me, the term is that brings flourishing and then nurtures human flourishing in the world. And if we can capture that as entrepreneurs, deal with our own trauma, so we become these generative sources of well-being and human flourishing, we'll unlock some of the secret sauce of entrepreneurship in the world, and theologically of new creation. So I just said it. The old pastor showed up and had a theological word yet. So you're chuckling. What have you got to say yet about Mako? We got to wrap up with that and go to questions.
Nothing more to say. I can't top that. So
Okay. Well, I'm sorry then, because you're supposed to be the hero here, not me. Well, Mako was, right? Oh, and I see here it goes from there then to the trauma talent connection, peak performance. And I do really think, I think this is something that entrepreneurs, at particular season of life, and I would say as early as 30s, but typically it's 40s and 50s, where if we don't resolve these personal inner conflicts, these personal inner tensions that absorbed a lot of energy, we're just going to fade off into where the years where we really should be bringing wisdom to the next generation.
Yeah. And
so we've got to resolve these.
I think one thing I would like to point out, because I have a friend of mine, we talk about the people who are sitting at the top of the mountain, and you have armchair Sherpas who want to tell you how do you walk through the mountain if you're at that point of breaking. But then there's people like, and I'll just call you out, Steve. There's people who've walked down the mountain, they've walked through the valley, they've gone through the other side. And what you need in this journey is, first of all, surrender, let things fall apart that need to fall apart,
Yeah.
and find somebody who can walk shoulder to shoulder with you down the mountain, through the valley, and up to the other side. And there's a lot of people who unfortunately just cannot find the courage within them to do that, or can't find the person to walk with the courage.
Yeah.
But if you're in that space, just from a personal note, all business aside, just from a personal note, I just want to encourage you to surrender that process and trust the process and go on that journey.
Yeah. And I would say I have over the last 5 years. And it's not done, but I have been surrounded by some of the most remarkable people who've joined. And I just think anybody who's listening, who's facing those issues, there are people who can walk with you. And you don't just need a voice, you need a presence. And on the other side of that process is a level of flourishing that you can only imagine at this moment. And at my darkest moment, I sat down with John, who was walking with me, and he was a professional therapist, also a theologian of many years, a former South Miami Beach cop. So straight shooter, tough as nails kind of guy. And he just looked me in the eyes and he said, Steve, when you get through this, and notice I said when, not if, you'll lead the most effective years of your life. And he said, notice I said effective, not productive.
That's powerful.
Okay, so we're going to open it for just a few questions. Rebecca, anybody submitted any questions? I'm not sure we told them they could. We've just been blazing on here. But people can go live, ask questions here. If you have anything you want to add, Rebecca, we invite you to do that here in the conclusion.
Well, while we're waiting to see if anybody does that, I do have one question that I have here. Are there any, or let me read it. Are there one or two big signs that it's the right time to let someone go and join another bus?
Well, I think I'll share my perspective, Steve. I think you'd be a great one to speak to this as well. I think one of the things that helps substantially is having very clear expectations of performance, communicating that, having a clear time period at which you expect to see results, and being able to then evaluate at that point whether that's actually happened. That's introducing the facts into the equation. And I think it's very easy. I've seen a lot of business owners. I know I'm prone to this. There's a reason the advice is to hire slow and fire fast. And the reason is because often there's and usually a high level of loyalty from business owners to their team members. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you can end up keeping people in their seats far too longer. And so that's just one simple tool to remove some of the emotion and subjectivity out of it. But Steve, I'm sure you've got lots of wisdom to share on this one.
Yeah, and I would just note, it feels like a very complex issue.
Right.
And with EOS, one of the things we try to do is make it as simple as possible. And we basically measure around three things. One of them is once you're crystal clear on your core values, they're truly core to who you are. We want to know, do they largely demonstrate and live in harmony with those core values? That's how you protect your culture. Secondarily, when you see the roles they're responsible for in the company, and do they get that? Do they get it? When they know what they're responsible, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do the job? Okay, and then third is, are they focused on what their priorities are to a level of measurable success that is mutually agreeable? So kind of those three things, and any one of those three that is out of alignment, if it can't be brought into alignment through a personal improvement plan, coaching, they have to leave the bus. If they're not aligned with your core values, they'll destroy your culture. If they won't have the capacity to do their job, they will actually fail to deliver the results you need. And if they don't have the capacity to do it at the set of measurables that are essential to the health of the company, you can't predict the performance of a company that leads to a healthy culture across the company. Either one of those three alone can take them out. But if you have touches of all three, you just need to find a different space. I would note, if they're a good culture fit, but they don't, we say GWC their job, they don't want to have the capacity, you have a large company, there may be another seat on the bus that they could fill and actually get that job, wanted to have the capacity to do it. So you always want to look first internally for a great culture fit. Then I would just note too that the hardest ones to let go are the people who are top performers, but are destroying your culture. Okay, those are the ones that actually have to go quickly. It's hard to let them go.
And if I can dovetail on that, though, there's a lot of high performers that are looking for really good cultural fits.
That's exactly right.
You can give them a home.
If you have a poverty mindset around human talent, okay, you're also very slow to let people go because you're afraid you can't find anybody. But you have a dynamic culture with a clear vision. and you can hire great people. Okay, great question. I think unless you have something else, we're going to wrap up. We're past the time here. Really appreciate all of you joining us here today. And we have webinar coming up again in June and July. If you are interested in the book, again, drop the email in the chat. We're getting those, or you can also go to Matthias's website, codehouse.com. That's CODEHAUS. That's the Germanic thing showing up, codehouse.com. And you'll see a form there to submit a request, and he will get you a hard copy. And is the PDF version available on Amazon already?
Yes, the ebook is available on
So
Amazon.
the ebook is available on Amazon. So you can just search Frictionless Teams, Matthias Miller on Amazon, and download that, do a quick e-read on any e-reader you have, or Kindle, of course. So thank you all so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all again next month. Thank you, Matthias. Appreciate it tremendously.
Thank you, Steve. It's an honor.